Okay, so we are off onto creating our unit circle, and to make this, there's lots of pieces of information, so we're going to take this one piece at a time. So what I want you to think of is think about the sines and cosines being positive and negative. Think of this really as a big XY plane, and that can help make a little bit more sense of this, because what you're going to have is you're going to have degrees, radians, and then to mix those together, you're going to have cosines and sines to make everything work. So the way that this is going to work is it's going to go degree, radian, cosine, sine. And so this is really, think about it as XY coordinate. These two things are just going to be kind of things that you need to know. So when we think about degrees, we're going to start our degrees at 0. Now, as we move along, we can logically think of this. These are broken into 4 90-degree bumps. And so each bump goes like as follows. The big slices are 30 degrees apiece. So this one goes up to 30. The little slices are 15. So 30, this makes 45. This makes 60, another 15. And this is now a 90. Okay? And then we're going to keep moving along. So being 30, so this becomes 120. This is 135, this is 150, and this becomes 180. And then we have 210, 225, 240, 270. And then we keep going. We have 300, 315, and we have 330. So, and then lastly, we get to 360, which is the same as 0, right? So we can spin this around as long as we want. So that's a really important fact, that we can keep going like that. Now, when it comes to radians, instead of breaking these into little chunks of 90, we break these into chunks of pi. Okay, so pi is the same thing as 180 degrees. And which is the same thing as 0. 0 is the same thing as 0. Radians, pi is the same thing as 180. So we're breaking this into chunks. Now, I suggest you think about this as pi over 2. 90 is pi over 2. Start breaking that down into little things. Well, 90 divided by 3 is 30. Pi over 2 divided by 3 would be pi over 6. 90 divided by 2 makes that. Pi over 2 divided by 2 makes pi over 4. And then we have, this would just be 2/3 of that. And so 2/3 of that would be pi over 3. Now this type of pattern is going to exist as we move along. Okay, so this is something that you're going to need to eventually memorize all the way around. So it's really, really important to do this. So as we move along, you'll notice a certain type of logic. In these corners here will be sixths. Right in the middle of each side, will be fourths, and then the thirds will be the little taller versions. So I'm going to go from pi over 3. This becomes 2 pi over 3. This is 3 pi over 4. This is 5 pi over 6. We then have pi. We then move to 7 pi over 6. We then have 5 pi over 4. We then have 4 pi over 3. This makes 3 pi over 2. We have 5 pi over 3. We have 7 pi over 4. And lastly, we have 11 pi over 6. And, 2 pi all the way around. So these are really important because you're going to see the measurements in terms of both. So you can equate these, you can always look back, but getting a good understanding of where these fractions are is going to be important to your success. Okay, so now we move on to some of the more difficult material. So cosine and sine, they have a maximum value of 1. And they have a minimum value of negative 1. And what happens is they are going to rotate through these numbers in a particular way. So when we start with our minimum value, your minimum value is always going to be negative 1. And as you move across, you cycle through the following numbers. So you go from negative 1, there's a negative square root of 3 over 2. You have negative square root of 2 over 2. You have negative 1 half, 0. And as you keep going along to your max, 0 goes to 1 half, goes to the square root of 2 over 2, goes to the square root of 3 over 2, and then it's going to go to 1. And then as we go from there to there, we then return and go backwards. Right? So you'll see what I mean as we go along, but pay careful attention to this section over here. So for cosine, cosine represents the x-coordinate. It can be no larger than it is right at the beginning. So our cosine starts at 1. And so we are going to head backwards down this list. So we then move, the first value is the square root of 3 over 2. And we move to the square root of 2 over 2, we move to 1 half, and then finally 0. See, if we were to draw a line here, the x-coordinate would be 0. Where here, the x-coordinate would be 1. And where here, the x-coordinate would be a half. Now that we're at 0, we keep going all the way till we get to our minimum. So the smallest value that cosine can take. So this becomes negative 1 half. We get negative square root of 2 over 2, negative square root of 3 over 2, and negative 1. Well, then we start our march back up. So we get negative square root of 3 over 2, negative square root of 2 over 2. We get, negative square root of 2 over 2, sorry. Negative 1 half, and then back to 0. And then guess what? We start our climb again, right? The cosines are going to be the same here because it's the same x value. Notice how over here, negative a half and negative a half, they're the same because they have the same x value. So this is 1 half, square root of 2 over 2, and this is the square root of 3 over 2. And then we're back to 1, and then we keep cycling back and forth, and so on forever. Here's the nice thing. If you took this circle and rotated it, the sine would be doing the exact same kind of thing. So we can use the same logic here, except we start at what number? What's the y-coordinate here? Well, the y-coordinate of sine to start is 0. It's not up or down. And so we start at 0, and do we say, okay, are we climbing, or is our y going up or down? Well, we're going up. So we start at 0, and we're going to cycle this way. So 0, we then move to a half. We then move to the square root of 2 over 2, the square root of 3 over 2, and 1. So now we've reached our max, and so then we start our climb down from 1. So we get the square root of 3 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, 1 half, 0. So that now we're descending again, so we get negative 1 half. So you notice how the sign is negative now because we're below the x-axis of sorts. So we get negative square root of 2 over 2, negative square root of 3 over 2, and negative 1. So we're all the way as far down. So now we start our climb back up. So we got negative 1. This becomes negative square root of 3 over 2, negative square root of 2 over 2, and negative 1 half. And then we rotate again and again forever and ever and ever. Now, knowing these numbers, which really we have the numbers, 1 and its negative version, square root of 3 over 2, and its negative version, square root of 2 over 2, and its negative version, 1 half, and its negative version, and 0. So there's 5 different values that you are kind of expected to memorize. And so long as you can understand which values would be bigger or smaller, you can kind of use this scale in your mind to build it. But this will be something that you'll need to know. Now, for our quiz, I could ask you any potential part of this. I could say, what's the sine of 30? Well, you'll need to know that this is 30, and this is your sine. I could say, where is the sine of half? Well, you would need to know that the sine is a half at these two angles. And I could say, what's the radian, or what's the degree? So you're going to need to get this picture down in your head as quickly as you can.